Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So today I'm going to do an autopsy of the show She-Hulk. Well, more precisely, an autopsy of the storytelling within the show of She-Hulk, as through the words of the writers and creators of that story and the words of other Marvel employees. But before I get there, I just want to remind everyone that the early bird sign-up page for my next graphic novel is now up. The link for it is in the description and on the pinned comment. You can click on that link, go over there and leave your email address. If you do so, you will be informed via email when the campaign goes live. And if you do so and then order anything from the campaign, then you will get with your order a free exclusive pinup poster, which you can only get in this way. The graphic novel is entitled The Valiant Heroes. It has 3 separate stories, which are between 22 and 26 pages, which is the normal page count for a comic. So basically you're getting 3 comics, plus there is an additional backup story. These stories are all connected to my first graphic novel, which is Thomas Valiant. However, you can read them on their own. While you can get Thomas Valiant #1 with this new campaign as well, I endeavor to make each story a separate story that you can read on its own. You don't have to do a whole bunch of homework in order to understand what's going on. The first story is The Valiant Heroes #1. The second story is The Redemption of Kit Fox. The third story is called The Rampaging Thor. And the backup story is a short story about 2 new characters and is done in a manga-esque kind of way because a manga studio is actually doing the art for this story. And that early bird sign-up page will only be up for a very limited time. I'm just waiting on a couple of pieces of art from my artists, which should be done in the next week or 2. And then the entire campaign is going to go live. So if you wish to sign up early and get that free exclusive pinup poster with your order, you should do so right away because as soon as I can, this campaign is going live. But back to my topic. Back to this autopsy of the She-Hulk show. Now, what am I going to do? I'm going to go over an article which has been posted on Marvel.com. And I really like going over these articles from Marvel.com because the interviewer is someone who works for Marvel. The people they are interviewing, which are the people who created the show, the people who directed the show and wrote the show, they also work for Marvel/Disney. And it is being published on a forum as a promotional tool by Marvel/Disney. And thus we know everything from the questions being asked, to the answers to those questions, to how this article was curated, to when it was put up, to what they're talking about. All of that has been approved by Marvel/Disney. And as I said, I'm going to go over the storytelling elements of what went into the story. I'm not going into the story itself. Now that's important because I will tell you right off the bat, I have not watched this show. I have no intention of watching this show, and therefore I'm not going to critique what happens in the show itself. I'm going to critique how the story was created, and if you've watched the show, you can then apply what happens in the show yourself to see why this is a ridiculous way to tell a story, but is quite specifically how Marvel now tells a story. And this video might run a little bit long because the article is a little longer than usual, but it's because we get a lot of information with this and it just keeps on going right up to the end. There's some spectacularly bizarre statements made by these people, which when they make them, I just said to myself, why in the world would you admit that? So going through the entire thing will be worth it. So let's jump right in. And for this entire thing, I will give you in the background the article itself. So if you want to read along with it, or if you want to read it separately, because I'm not going to match word for word what I'm saying when I read it with what's on the screen, but it will be there. And the link for it is also in the description if you want to go over and read it and follow along with me as well. So this article was published on October 6th and is talking about episode 8 of She-Hulk. And the article is called She-Hulk, Exploring Jennifer Walters' Justified Rage in episode 8. Now they put justified in quotation marks, but they don't put it in quotation marks in the article itself. And I'm going to show you just how much of an oxymoron justified rage is. The subtitle is, Jen thinks that she can be in control of this thing that is ultimately way outside of her control. Now that's a quote from one of the writers, by the way. So I'm going to go over the preamble, that is the first part of this article, fairly quickly, just because we want to get into the meat of what they're saying here. But it begins by saying, early in episode 1 of Marvel Studios' She-Hulk, Bruce Banner makes a comment to his fuzzball cousin, Jennifer Walters, that if she's not careful with her newfound Hulk abilities, people won't see the Hulk. They'll only see a monster. Jen, still hellbent on not becoming a Hulk, let alone a superhero, brushes Bruce's comments aside. She knows how to control her anger and rage. Hey, she's a woman after all. So there's no way her emotions are going to get the better of her. She's not going to let the monster come out. So to a rational person, I think this preamble would say, you see, she thinks she's in control, but she's really not. Therefore, we're going to show her out of control. No, that's not where they're going at all. They're going to show how rage and being out of control is actually the way to go. But let me continue. Flash forward to episode 8 of the season, and Bruce's warning has come back to haunt her. During a gala honoring her as a recipient of the Female Lawyer of the Year award, Intelligentsia hacks the presentation and flashes private moments of Jen's life across the screen for the entire audience, including a video of her and Josh hooking up. Overcome with rage at that moment, Jen lashes out and destroys the entire video screen, sending the audience fleeing outside. But Jen's still not done. She grabs one of the Intelligentsia goons and roars at him before she realizes she's been surrounded by damage control. The one thing Jen insisted she wasn't going to let happen, happened. The creative team behind She-Hulk, many of whom identify as female, and yes, they use that language all the time in these Marvel articles, who identify as female were intent on pulling from their own real-life experiences to capture the full spectrum of Jen's emotional state, exploring the rage and sadness Jen has been forced to bottle up this whole time, only to let it bubble over now. Now, a few things quickly to pull out of this. You see, it's the identity of being a female that is center stage here. And that identity of being female revolves around what? It revolves around what they say here, an emotional state. That's what this entire story is built around, the emotional state of women. As they say here, the full spectrum of her emotional state, from rage to sadness. And where do they get all of this from? They pull it from the real-life experiences of the writers. They explain this a little more by saying, I think, and this is the head writer, Jessica Gao, talking, she says, I think it's so important to have the representation behind the camera match the representation in front of the camera, because there are just so many life experiences, these lived-in experiences and nuances that you can't fake and you can't replicate if you really just don't understand it. Head writer Jessica Gao tells Marvel.com, having all these women who all have different life experiences and perspectives and points of view really helped fill out this very well-rounded cast and this world. Gao mentions that the creative team began mining each other's lives to find common threads, and those were the things that we really wanted to infuse in the show so that women who watched the show really felt seen and really felt represented. Now, I'm sure you're not going to be shocked when I say she contradicts herself here and with this statement later on in this article. You see, she's talking about representation. This representation behind the camera needs to match the representation in front of the camera. What is this representation? It's all about women. How is a representation that is continually centered around women giving you a well-rounded world? I have no idea. To me, that's a contradiction. One of the other points of contradiction is the fact that, you see, in order for them to connect with their so-called female audience, they need to connect something in the female audience's lives with the lives of the women who are writing and producing the show to begin with. So what did they do? They mined each other's experiences, their lived experiences, to find the common threads within all the women who were working on this show, took that common thread, put it down in the show itself so that that common thread could resonate within the female audience and then connect the female audience with what the show is trying to say. And this is funny because what she's saying here is that women are the only ones who really can understand what's going on here. As she says, these nuances that you can't fake and can't replicate if you really just don't understand it. So if you haven't lived it, you don't understand it. If you're not a woman, you've never lived it. Therefore, men are not going to connect with this. However, at the same time, later on in the article, these women go into a statement where their basic argument is men and women are exactly the same. I'm sorry, but you can't have both at the same time. You can't have men and women are exactly the same, therefore, and build your argument upon that, while at the same time saying that women understand these lived experiences because they have lived them, and they are the only ones who get to live them because they are women. It doesn't work that way. Now, here's one of the other points I want to pull out of that. You see how this is contrary to what I'm always talking about, how to represent a story. She talks about a well-rounded cast and a well-rounded world, which is in this story. Well, how would you do that? Well, within a traditional story, you do it as a representation of reality. But here, it's not a representation of objective reality. That's what traditionally the reality that you're supposed to put down on a page has a framework within. No, the reality that they're talking about here are these shared lived experiences of women, which is to say, subjective. Nothing but subjective. And we know that they're nothing but subjective because there are other people who can't relate to them. Can't relate if you haven't experienced them. That's a definition of subjectivity. So everything that follows is based upon a subjective female interpretation of things, and not just a subjective female interpretation, but a progressive subjective female interpretation of things, which again, all center around emotion. And also, you might note something else which I'm always talking about. That representation of reality that the traditional way of telling a story is based upon is also based upon an understanding that, hey, human beings have a nature. That's part of reality. And so you connect with what they are. The human being nature, that's how you connect with your audience. But you see here, within what she's talking about, that entire idea is completely missing from this equation. This is how, quote unquote, progressive storytelling goes. They don't believe in their ideological understanding of a human nature that is shared by everyone. Therefore, if you haven't lived these experiences, you simply cannot understand them. And the only way that works is if we don't have something that we can both draw on, which is the same for both of us, that is to say, a nature of humanity. And if that's not there, then all you got left is shared life experiences. But anyways, I should go on. It continues. One of those, of course, and she's talking about one of those shared experiences that all the women who were behind the camera in representation, what they all experienced within their lives. She's talking about that here. One of those, of course, was being forced to keep emotions in check, even in the worst situations. And even though Jen might turn into a 6-foot, 7-inch towering green Hulk, she's still Jen Walters. And the experience she has as just Jen aren't going to go away. Once again, tying everything back to subjective emotional experiences. She continues, she is a woman who walks through the world and has experienced things that every woman has experienced. Director and executive producer Kate Coiro, who helmed episode 8, explains, we just took these very relatable experiences that women have and put them onto this character who is able to defend herself and doesn't have to be polite if she doesn't want to because she has brawn that most women don't have. It really felt like an organic part of the process. As we introduce her to the MCU, we introduce a fully formed female character who has experiences that we can all relate to. Now, of course, when she says we can all relate to, she's talking only to women here, because only women can relate to these things, as she has mentioned above and will mention later. But let's go over this paragraph and take a look at what she thinks a woman actually is. If we don't have a human nature, what is the female nature and how does that play out in her mind and thus in the story? She talks about Jennifer Walters here as a fully formed character. Again, who women can relate to. So a fully formed woman. This woman is formed by her experiences, which makes her relatable to other women. And here's how she says that is an organic process of showing this character, of fully developing this character. It's a character who defends herself and doesn't have to be polite because she has the brawn that most women don't. So in her mind, the organic process of being a fully formed woman is, guess what? If you have the power to defend yourself, you don't have to be polite, you just have to use that power. Now, on a note here, it never says when you're attacked, or when a woman is attacked, or when Jennifer is attacked. No, she says when you have to defend yourself. I think those are two completely different things. Why? Because again, an attack is an objective thing. It happens to someone. You feeling like you have to defend yourself is a subjective thing. I feel attacked. Oh, well, I have to defend myself because I feel this way. You see, it's not objectively happening, it's subjectively happening. And so she feels like she must defend herself, and she has the ability to draw upon power that most women don't, because all women in this case would want to defend themselves. Against what? Against being, as they see it, encountering an experience that is run through the subjective mill of emotion and makes them feel like they don't want to be polite. But again, the core of this is it all comes down to power, and we'll get to that in a little bit. The article continues. Unfortunately, one of those experiences happens to be when your privacy is violated in the most public way. As Jen watches a video captured of her and Josh, and in brackets it says, ugh, that guy, close brackets, play out for her friends, family, and colleagues, and it's too much for her to handle. Now, this also brings into something that I've talked about a lot on my channel. You see, for these quote-unquote progressive people, it's all about a shaming mechanism, whereas you have most of Western civilization for the last 2,000 years not depending on a shaming mechanism. It's a guilt culture. A Christian culture is a guilt culture. The old pagan societies and this new pagan society, they're all shame cultures, very much different from a guilt culture where you internalize the rules and you point your finger at yourself. No, in a shame culture, you violate the outside societal rules and other people point their finger at you saying you did something wrong. You see, that's what happens here. It is the public violation that she has to endure here. One thing I also have to point out here, you'll notice that there is absolutely no mention here or later on of the fact that she is actually paying for things that she did. If she didn't want people to see these things happening, then maybe she shouldn't have done them. Now, I understand that intimate things are intimate things and should not be put on display in front of other people. But again, this is an intimate thing which she specifically chose to do, which a lot of people would morally not see as being something anybody should be doing. She hooked up with this guy, and then she got intimate with him, and now it's up on a screen, and now she's embarrassed, and now she's ashamed. Whoop-de-doo, I don't care. This is a problem because you made this problem. If you had been in control of yourself, then this problem wouldn't be here. But control of self, no, that's going to fly out the window. We'll see with this justifiable rage that they continue to talk about later on. So one of the directors continues and says, the rage of just feeling that people can take your power from you, that you have no agency when you deserve so much more. That's definitely, and then she cuts herself off and says, female rage is very deeply explored on the show. Director of episode 5, 6, and 7, Anu Valia adds, and yes, I'm probably butchering these names, I really don't care. Even just filming the end of episode 7, where it's revealed that Josh captured footage of Jen in bed, made her incredibly uncomfortable. Anu adds that for the most part, it's been interesting to see human Jen have more anger than She-Hulk, which is an interesting dynamic. Now again, you see, it's all about power. It all comes down to power. She feels like she's been violated because this private thing has been put into the public. Well, it wouldn't be put into the public if you didn't do it to begin with. It's your problem that this actually happened, because who would have thought a guy who hooks up with girls would be an immoral fellow and take pictures of it? Gee, where would that come from? How do you have that kind of blind spot in your mind? where you can't see someone who, you and he, are doing something that most people would consider immoral, then going and doing an immoral thing. Why? Because they don't see that hookup as being immoral in any way, shape, or form. Not even to the acknowledgement of other people find it immoral. No, they see that as part of the patriarchy, and we'll get into that. But again, it all comes down to power. You see, as it says right at the first of this paragraph, the rage of just feeling that people can take your power from you. But this power, what is it the power to do? Well, it's the power of her to do whatever it is she wants to do. That again connects to what I would call an immoral thing that she's doing, which is casually hooking up with other people. But again, you see, the power that they're talking about here is a power to do whatever it is you want to do, whenever it is you want to do it, without any repercussions. That's the power that they're talking about. And when that is taken away from you, when the agency, as they say here, is taken away from you, as it says, you deserve so much more. Why in the world do you deserve so much more? Why? Where is the answer to that? The only answer I can find to that question here is you deserve so much more because you're a woman. That's it. Because after that, she says, female rage is very deeply explored on this show. So, as a character, Jennifer is justifiably enraged because she deserves more because she's a woman, and deserves more what? Deserves more and more to do whatever it is she wants to do, whenever it is she wants to do it, with absolutely zero consequences. And again, this whole thing is based upon how they subjectively, emotionally feel, and this is what the writers say is a fully formed female character. Again, a fully formed female character to them is someone who is guided purely by emotion, subjective emotion, to the point where she can be enraged or sobbingly sad, and from those emotions can do whatever it is she wants to do and take zero responsibility for any of those actions. That's their definition, their de facto definition from all of this that they're describing of what a woman is. You females in my audience, because I know some of you are out there, do you like this description of you as a woman? So this director, this female director, Anu, continues by saying, you would think that when she becomes Hulk, she really lashes out. But when she's just Jen, she knows what it feels like to have power. And now she doesn't have it. I think that was a really smart decision to be able to play with that. So, what does this entire show focus upon? What is this dynamic that they keep talking about? This dynamic is a woman who is both incredibly powerful and incredibly powerless all at the same time. And what they're doing is exploring that emotional connection between those two things in order to connect subjectively to their audience. Once again, a female audience, because those are the only people in the audience who have that lived experience to allow them to connect to what the story is about. She continues by saying, initially, she's sort of confidently able to deal with becoming She-Hulk because she spent her entire life being angry or afraid. So that transition into She-Hulk is effortless. Star Titania Maslany continues, it doesn't have a bunch of torture in it. It doesn't have a bunch of violence in it. It's clean because that's how she's learned to deal with her emotions. So when we do see Jen's rage finally come out, Maslany wanted it to be justified. So, two things I want to pull out here. First of all, you see how in her entire life she's angry or afraid. Why? As they say later on, it's the patriarchy, stupid. And that's what allows her to transition into She-Hulk so effortlessly. But at the same time, you see, it says it doesn't have a bunch of torture in it. It doesn't have a bunch of violence in it. It's clean because it's how she's learned to deal with her emotions. This goes back to something which I talked about with Marvel Comics, when the VP of Content and Character Development gave an interview talking about how characters no longer have a pathos anymore. She said, we're not putting that in our stories anymore. That's not the way we're going to develop a quote-unquote hero. You see, that's exactly what's going on here. She's talking about there's no torture, there's no violence. I'm sorry, but that moment of torture and violence, whether it be external or internal, is for most characters, and in the traditional way that a story is done, certainly a story with a hero, is the moment of pathos. That is not here, and that's purposefully not here. And it's replaced with what? It's replaced with how a woman deals with her emotions. And not just how she deals with emotions at a specific point in time, but how she deals with emotions all through her life. And how do you know how they deal with emotions all through their life when you're only getting this little snippet? Well, because of course you have to understand about the patriarchy. So some quote unquote progressive ideological understanding is assumed so that you can understand the driving force, the engine behind this character, which is not a pathos, it's an emotional blossoming. So I want to read that last line again. It says, so when we do see Jen's rage finally come out, Maslany wanted it to be justified. And Maslany continues by saying, I always wanted to remind all of us that this moment where she is so angry is massively justified. It's only because of the outward perception of that anger and how it looks from the outside that it looks monstrous. Of course, she'd want to go after this guy who just publicly humiliated her. Of course. Now again, I want to pull out a couple of things here. Justified. She's saying her rage is not just justified, but massively justified. Now, again, what is the traditional idea of justice that actually underpins everything in our society, from the money in your pocket to how the justice system works to the politicians and how they're supposed to work? What is justice and what does it mean? It means rendering to others what is their due. So what does she think is the due of a woman here? It is the due of a woman to become enraged because she is humiliated. First of all, I have to point out here, again, I'm a Christian, and for me, as a Christian, humility is something you actually strive for, something you actually want. But for these people, no. Humility is the exact opposite of it. Trust me, I know on my channel, when I do stupid things in this channel, especially when I spell things wrong or have the wrong pronunciation or punctuation within my videos, people in the comments like to roast me for it. And when that happens, I think to myself, that's a perfectly good thing to do. Thank you for humbling me just that little bit. I take it as being something good because, yeah, I need a little bit of humility every now and then. We all do, sometimes more than just a little. But you see here, for these people, humility is an ultimate evil. They don't want any kind of humility, especially this public humiliation, which is basically telling her, hey, guess what? You shouldn't have done this thing by hooking up with this guy who's a slime ball. Sorry, but there's consequences. That's the humility that they're talking about. This, they think, should not be there in any way. Why? Well, again, it hampers this woman from doing exactly what she wants to do whenever she wants to do it without any consequences. And when you take that power and agency away from a woman to do that, then she is justifiably owed, massively justifiably owed the right to not just be angry, but to be enraged. Now, quickly, I just want to say, do you know where the origin of the word rage comes from? It's an old Latin word which comes through the French, and it comes from the Latin rabies. For the Latin, rabies was applied not just to animals, but to people as well. It means madness. It wasn't just a medical condition, it was madness. It was a description of madness, and through English, we divided it into two. Rabies for animals and rage for people, but it's the same thing. It is a type of madness. So what she's talking about here is a type of madness. She's saying a woman can justifiably be mad, fly into a rage that is akin to madness, because again, you took away from her the power and agency to do immoral things. Oh, I'm so sorry. But again, women out there, do you see what these people actually think of you? What at the heart are you? You're rabbit. It is only your emotions which define you, and that's it. As she says, of course she'd want to go after this guy. Of course. She says it twice. And again, they mention here, from the outside, it looks monstrous. But as they're trying to explain, it's not really monstrous. It's just justifiable rage. The article continues by saying, two of the women closest to Jen in the show, her best friend and colleague, Nikki Ramos and Mallory Brooke, try and stop her from completely lashing out at the gala, but it's no use. Both are forced to simply watch it happen and then help Jen through the aftermath. Which is funny because you're saying there's an aftermath to her justifiable rage. So they know that this justifiable rage is going to cause destruction, but they still think it's justifiable. It continues, Ginger Gonzagas, who plays Nikki, mentioned that a healthy amount of rage is justified, especially for Jen in this current situation. Don't forget, episode 1 of the series is actually even titled A Normal Amount of Rage. Once again, I have to point back to what I'm always talking about in my videos. You see here, these people, these quote-unquote progressive people, what do they think is the way that human beings should exist? Human beings should exist in a state of rampant emotions. Basically, it is the new way of thinking, which in modern times, I guess it would start with Hobbes and Locke, with their idea that, you see, the emotions, the passion should be in control, not the reason. Sure, the reason is there, but it's just there to serve the emotions, to make sure that they can get what they want. This is not the way Western civilization sees human beings and their nature for the majority of its existence. Up until the modern period, everyone assumed that the natural state of a human being is that the reason should be in control, and the emotions, yes, they are there, but they are the servant of the reason. And how and why did they come to this conclusion? They came to this conclusion because if you want something to actually work out for you in reality, this is how you have to act. But no, these progressive people, they think, no, see, the emotion should be forefront, right there, and they are the ones in control. It is healthy for you to be in a rage, to be a person who is temporarily mad, the equivalent of a rabid animal. This is normal. This is healthy in their estimation, and especially for a woman. They continue on with this quote from Ginger Gonzaga saying, I love how in the pilot she talks about how she knows how to deal with rage, kind of because she's been forced by the patriarchy to contain it, which is not healthy and not fun. If we're not mad about injustices, if we're not mad about being diminished or silenced or marginalized or called difficult or having an opinion or called a million different awful pejoratives that they will call women that they won't call men when they're having thoughts or being creative, I don't want that, Gonzagas explains. I want people to be upset by that. So it's a healthy amount of rage, like let's be mad at this status quo and then push through that in a way that we can find a way to create some sort of change and have a smarter dialogue about it. Oh, sweet merciful heavens, this woman. So you see here that this is a woman talking about how women and men should be completely the same. And when a woman does something that a man does, they should be treated exactly the same. I'm sorry, that's not how things work. That's not what equal means. Equal means balanced, which is to say, a man and woman can be equal, but they're not the same. That doesn't mean they're the same. As I always say, 2 plus 3 equals 4 plus 1. That is a balanced equation. But the part of the equation on each side of that equal sign is not the same. Men are 2 plus 3. Women are 4 plus 1. Just because they're equal doesn't mean they're the same. But her justification here, her way of thinking is that when women do the exact same thing as men, they have to be treated in the exact same way. That's the only thing that is just. And it's only just, again, if you assume that they're completely the same. But again, as I said at the top of this article, they're already assuming that they're not exactly the same because they don't have the same life experiences, and men cannot. And I repeat that, cannot understand what women go through because they have not gone through those experiences and cannot go through those experiences. Now, I'm sure someone would say, well, it's because of the patriarchy, just as she says here. It's because they live in the patriarchy. That's why they don't understand these experiences, but they are exactly the same as us. No, I'm sorry. If there's a reason they're stuck in the patriarchy and can't get out of it in order to experience the exact same things as you experience, then there's something different about them, which means you're not exactly the same. And the most bizarre part of this entire thing is where she says, I want people to be upset by that. So it's a healthy amount of rage. Like, let's be mad at this status quo and then push through that in a way that we can find a way to create some sort of change and have a smarter dialogue about it. I'm sorry. Are you mental? You're saying that, yes, we have to unleash this rage that people have pent up within them in order to upset everything that is going on, in order to push through the status quo, and using that uncontrolled emotion to do this will lead to a state of what? She thinks a state of creativity and smart dialogue. What a mental statement. But again, if you're someone who just depends on your emotion in order to understand everything, that's what kind of reasoning you're gonna have. The article continues, and while we're seeing the depths of female rage and emotion, it's hard to also not see just the support system Jen has built for herself with Nikki and Mallory, especially the latter. While the two start off on icy terms, Mallory quickly warms to Jen and Nikki, becoming a person she can rely on during tough times. Mallory can also spot Jen's outbursts a mile away. And they go into a quote from someone, I don't know who they are. I think it's one of the actresses, and it says, I think it shows the growth in the relationship that she's standing on a stage with her when it happens. Renee Elise Goldsberry says, if it happened at the beginning of the season, she would not be able to help her. But what she discovered, and I think she discovered it first in episode 5, is it is incredibly unifying to see somebody, specifically another woman, injured. It doesn't matter. Everything else is off the table. Every other reason why I might be annoyed or threatened by you, or why I decided that we're not friends, is because we don't have things in common. If someone is coming for you, they're coming for both of us. So here's something, again, that I've always talked about on my channel. These people. Everything is centered around the emotions, but not just the emotions, but a sympathetic emotion. They always talk about empathy, but really what they're talking about is sympathy. So what the story does is it shows you an injured woman, and therefore other women identify with that injury, that emotional injury, and then everything else is off the table. You don't have to concentrate on anything else. That emotional connection is there, and that's all you need. And that's what they're talking about here. Some people who were reviewing this show, and I've watched reviews of this show, they keep on saying, why are these parts in here? Nothing happens. Nothing is going on. Why do you concentrate so much on this conversation or that little bit where these two people with She-Hulk are just doing a whole lot of nothing? Well, you see, you don't understand what the entire focus of the show is about. The entire focus of the show is emotion. So what they're showing you on the screen is these little bits of emotional connection that either connect the two characters together directly, or with something like this, where one of the characters sees Jen in an emotionally injured way, and then everything else is gone. That one emotion is enough to trump everything else, and then there's an emotional connection there, and she says, if someone attacks you, I will defend you because they're attacking me at the same time, because I feel such an emotional connection to you. I empathize, sympathize with you. That's all this is about. And that's all that the story is created upon. People who don't understand what's going on within the story, and thus call it a bad story, the reason why they think that is because, hey, you're thinking. You're trying to understand it. You're not supposed to do that. You're just supposed to use your feels. And it starts to wrap up by saying, at the end of episode 8, it's hard not to hear Bruce's warning echoing back from episode 1. The creative team sprinkled those breadcrumbs throughout the season, knowing what was coming in the end. So a lot of people have speculated that these writers didn't know what they were doing and just slapped everything down on a page. No, apparently this was all done in preparation for this exact story to play out in this way. So much so that they thought they were being clever in sprinkling these breadcrumbs of these emotional connections and this hearkening back to this rage, which they see as justified, which again is the entire point of this article. That's what the title of the article is about. This is exactly what they meant to do. One of the directors says, within our show, We were kind of exploring ideas that we knew would loop back around, and that was tied to the meta nature of the show. It was always being conscious of what the main themes are. It's about a reluctant superhero who has come to terms with the duality of her nature and how you can retain your sense of self, but you have to question what self means when you're perceived so differently by the outside world. So, what do we see here? What does everything come down to once again? It's the exploration of self. This is not a story. Watching you explore yourself through other people's emotions and experiences is not how you construct a story. But that's how these quote-unquote progressive people think. It's all about identity politics. It's all about the self, how you identify with self. As I see here, how you question what self means. It's simply an exploration of Jennifer's self, how this duality of power and not power is shown through an emotional roller coaster, which includes a justifiable rage, which all comes about because the patriarchy. This is, as she says, the meta nature of the show, which, and I quote, they were conscious of in their main themes. It continues, though sad for our hero, Maslany notes that this outburst of rage, and I quote, felt so right to me. Once again, you see, this outburst of rage is right. This madness on behalf of this woman because of how she's being treated, because of the patriarchy. This is justifiable and right to the people who are writing and acting and producing this show, and then makes this character a hero. Which, as I'm always saying, is the exact opposite of what a hero should be. This hero is exploring herself and what it means to be herself through her power and her subjective emotional state. That's not a hero. A hero is a self-sacrificing individual. And by the way, I'll have to note, I do believe that the actual Hulk is a hero. In some small way, he has heroic qualities, especially the early Hulk from the early comics. Why? Because again, he does fly into a rage, but at that point where he's flying into that rage, he has the emotional and mental capacity of basically a child. Therefore, he's not able to reason. Therefore, some of the things that he's doing are justifiable because he doesn't have access to the ability to think through these things, and all he has left is to lash out. But this character, She-Hulk, she has at her fingertips, from the very beginning, clear access to her rational state. She is able to rationally think about these things and deal with them, and she decides to deal with them through emotional outbursts of rage. That does not make her a hero. That makes her a selfish individual. But again, I guess a selfish individual is what these quote-unquote progressive people see as a hero. And it finishes up by saying, to feel like you could have control over how people perceive you. I think it's so true, she continues. Jen thinks that she can be in control of this thing that is ultimately way out of her control. I just knew that we were weaving a story within highly comedic, goofy moments that was leading to something deeply intense and moving and political and all of it. Oh, sweet merciful heavens. Again, this is what I'm talking about. This is why people don't want these stories. Right at the end, almost the very last word. What does she call this story? It is a politically charged story. She says it's deeply intense, moving, and political. No wonder you people can't write a show. Not only do you have to be able to identify with this woman to understand exactly what she's going through by having the same lived experience, that's cutting your audience down so far that you're going to get a tiny sliver of the population actually watching this show. First of all, you got to be a woman. That discounts 50% of the population. Then you've got to have this progressive understanding of how things work. That, I would say, at the very least, cuts your audience down to half of women, so you're cutting it down now to 1/4 of the actual human race. And on top of that, you have to have women who have had similar life lived experience. But of course, they assume that all women have these similar life lived experiences because of the patriarchy. But again, you see how every step they take just whittles their audience down more and more and more. Why? Because they are taking themselves away from the traditional, rational way of constructing a story with every step they take. And as they move farther and farther away from what a story actually is, their audience diminishes more and more. Because sure, if you want to subjectively interpret a story and watch a story that way, you can go ahead and do that. But that doesn't mean that the story was constructed subjectively. It may be constructed objectively. Nor does it mean that a story, if it wishes to be an actual story, follow the definition of what a story actually is, it can even be constructed subjectively. That's a contradiction in terms. If you have a definition of what a story is, that's an objective definition of what the thing is. If you don't follow that objective definition and you create something which is based upon nothing but the subjective, then guess what? You're not creating a story. You're creating something else. You're creating a panegyric or propaganda or something other than a story. And it's no wonder that these people can't create a story when all they want to focus on is power. The power to be selfish and do whatever you want without responsibility. The power to fly into a rage, to be a rabid madman or madwoman because they think that's the natural progression of how people deal with things. Fly into a maddening rage in order to push through this thing that has been standing in the way of their access to power. And then they believe, after doing that, they can be creative and rational. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. And don't forget, the link is in the description and on the pinned comment for the early bird sign-up page for my new graphic novel. If you go there and leave your email address, you will be informed when the project goes live, if all goes well, in a couple of weeks. And you will then get, when you order from the campaign, a free exclusive pin-up poster that you can only get if you sign up early. All right, I'll leave it there. I'll see you later. Bye.